I knew something was off the second I opened my front door and saw Sheila Grantham standing on my porch. Arms crossed, lips pursed, and that ridiculous clipboard tucked under one elbow like it gave her superpowers. Sheila was the self-declared queen of the Oak Hill Pines HOA, and she never showed up without an agenda. "Mr. Granger Decker," she said, drawing out my name like it tasted sour. "We need the keys to your garage." I blinked. "Excuse me. The HOA board has voted unanimously," she said, tapping her clipboard with a cheap pink pen. "Due to ongoing concerns about improper use of storage space, we're requiring access to all garages in the neighborhood." I laughed. "You can't be serious." She didn't laugh. "If you refuse, we'll consider it a violation of the community agreement and you'll face fines, daily." My gut told me something was off. I'd lived here for 6 years, paid my dues, mowed my lawn, didn't throw wild parties. The only time I used my garage was to store tools and work on my car, my quiet little project. "So why the sudden interest? You want to inspect my garage," I said slowly, stepping out onto the porch. "You could have just asked." "I am asking," she said, fake sweet now. "But we'll need the key by tomorrow at the latest." "Fine," I said. "Come by tomorrow morning, I'll open it for you." She looked surprised, like she didn't expect me to agree. That's when my suspicion really kicked in. I watched her walk off, heels clicking down the sidewalk like she'd just won something. What she didn't know was that I had just installed a full set of cameras inside and outside my garage the week before. Not because of her, because someone had been snooping around at night. I wanted proof. The next morning, right at 9, Sheila showed up with 2 other board members, Lana, who never made eye contact, and Dennis, who always looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. "Well?" she asked, tapping her foot. I unlocked the side door to the garage and swung it open. Sheila took one step in and froze. She went pale. "What is that?" Inside, neat as can be, were rows of labeled boxes, my tool bench, and covered car parts, but the thing that made her panic. The stack of HOA documents I'd printed out and tacked to the corkboard, bylaws, financial reports, and records of fines issued over the last 2 years highlighted, annotated, compared against the actual HOA charter. "I've been doing some reading," I said calmly. "Turns out you've been issuing illegal fines and you're not even allowed to demand access to private garages without a court order." This is a hostile environment," she snapped, spinning around. "You can't investigate us. You're a homeowner association, not the CIA," I said. Then she pulled out her phone and called 911. "Yes, we have a dangerous situation," she told the dispatcher, voice shaking. "He's got suspicious materials. It's some sort of anti-HOA operation." I just leaned against the wall and crossed my arms. Within 5 minutes, a patrol car rolled up. 2 officers stepped out, calm and curious. Sheila ran to them like they were her personal bodyguards. "He's compiling documents, secret ones. He has surveillance cameras. He's been watching us." The taller officer looked at me. "Sir, can you explain?" "Sure," I said, handing him a folder. "Here's what I've found. Dozens of fines issued without proper votes, board meetings never recorded, and Sheila here. She approved payments to a landscaping company owned by her nephew, no bids, no disclosure." Sheila's face turned red. The officer raised an eyebrow. "Is that true, ma'am?" "That's irrelevant." The second officer walked into my garage and came back out nodding. "It's clean, just paperwork, and cameras are legal on your own property." Sheila looked like she was about to combust. "We'll be forwarding this to the county," the officer told me. "This could be fraud." Sheila sputtered. "I'm the victim here." "No," I said. "You're the one who just got caught trespassing on the truth." By noon that same day, word had spread. Oak Hill Pines was a tight-knit grid of mostly retired couples and young families. But nothing got people talking faster than HOA drama, especially when patrol cars parked outside someone's house. I didn't say a word to anyone, but by the time I walked to the mailbox, a neighbor across the street, Maria Ortega, waved me over. "You okay?" she asked, wiping her hands on a dish towel. My husband said he saw the president of the HOA getting escorted out of your garage like she'd seen a ghost. I'm fine, I said. Turns out she didn't expect anyone to actually read the bylaws. Maria raised an eyebrow. Sheila. She barely reads her own emails. I handed her a copy of the same folder I'd given the police. Pass this around and tell your husband to look at page 6. That evening, I got a knock at the door. Not Sheila this time, this was someone I hadn't seen in months. Jonah Voss, former HOA board member, quit 2 years ago after a mysterious personal disagreement. I invited him in. I heard what happened, he said, glancing around as if the walls might be listening. You found the payments, didn't you? I found a lot more than that, I said, handing him a cup of coffee. I've got the landscaping invoices, copied checks, and even a timeline of when they voted on the contracts after they were signed. He leaned back, exhaling slowly. You know why I quit? Sheila rewrote the meeting minutes after we voted down the new fencing rules. Next thing I know, my signature appears on the approval form I never signed. I paused. You still have your old board login? Jonah reached into his jacket and pulled out a flash drive. Backed everything up before I left, he said. Didn't know what to do with it until now. We sat down at my kitchen table and plugged it in. What we found made both of us go quiet. There were audio recordings of board meetings that were never published. In one, Sheila could clearly be heard saying, "No one's going to check the bylaws, we'll just say it was approved." Another had her instructing Dennis to bury the cost under seasonal maintenance. But one file stood out. It was a scanned copy of a property variance request, denied except the attached signature was from a homeowner who died 2 months before the date on the form. That was more than fraud. That was forgery involving a deceased person. You need to bring this to someone higher up, Jonah said, his voice low. I nodded. Not just the police. The county auditor's office handles HOA financial oversight. The next morning, I took time off work and drove to the county administration building. I met with an auditor named Leila Wexler, who was already familiar with Oak Hill Pines. We've had 3 complaints from your neighborhood in the last year, she said, flipping through a file. But no one had documentation. I slid the flash drive and a printed binder across the table. You do now. She spent the next hour reviewing the evidence. Halfway through, she picked up the phone and called over a compliance officer. I'm initiating a formal audit today, she said. And we'll be freezing the HOA's discretionary spending until further notice. By the time I got back home, a gray sedan with county plates was parked in front of the HOA's community office, the one Sheila had turned into her personal headquarters. I didn't stop to gawk, but I saw her through the window, pacing with a phone to her ear. For once, she looked cornered. That night, Maria slipped an envelope under my door. Inside was a petition already signed by 27 households calling for a special meeting to vote on dissolving the current board. The minimum required was 25. The next day, I called the HOA's legal hotline. Sheila had set it up years ago to assist residents with compliance questions. What she didn't expect was someone using it to report her. I have evidence of financial misconduct, forged documents, and coercion by the current board president, I told the attorney. And I've already sent copies to the county. There was a long pause on the other end. Mr. Decker, I represent the HOA's interests, not individual board members. If even half of what you're saying is true, the insurance company will pull their liability coverage immediately. I figured, I said. I just wanted to make sure you heard it from me before the subpoenas start flying. That afternoon, Sheila finally broke her silence with a mass email to all residents. It was classic spin. She claimed she'd been targeted by a smear campaign and that outside influences were trying to destabilize the community. But her timing couldn't have been worse. The county had already posted a notice on the HOA bulletin board. Financial records were under review and no new fines could be issued until the audit concluded. The next board meeting was packed. The room, usually half empty, was standing room only. Sheila sat at the front, flanked by Dennis and Lana, faces tight, trying to maintain control. Jonah stood up first. Before we begin, I motion to remove Sheila Grantham as board president, effective immediately. The room erupted in scattered applause. Sheila tried to gavel things down, but the crowd wasn't having it. "You can't do this," she snapped. "You don't have the authority." I raised my hand. "Actually, we do," I said, holding up a copy of the HOA charter. "If over 1/3 of the homeowners sign a petition, the board must hold a vote for leadership removal. We're well over that." Sheila turned to Dennis and Lana, but they were both staring at the table. Neither said a word. "We'll proceed by ballot," I continued. "All in favor of removing Sheila Grantham, raise your hand." It wasn't even close. After the vote, Sheila stood up to leave but was met at the door by a county employee. "Ma'am, I need you to remain until our investigator arrives. There are questions about financial discrepancies during your tenure." Her face drained of color as she sat back down, silent. Outside, neighbors who'd once stayed quiet were now chatting in clusters, comparing notes. The mood wasn't angry anymore, it was energized, focused. Maria came up beside me, handing me a coffee. "You just broke the dam," she said. "Now everyone's watching." I nodded. That was always the point. 2 days after the vote, a plain white sedan rolled through Oak Hill Pines and parked across from my house again. This time, there were no sirens or accusations, just a clean-cut man in a navy blazer carrying a slim briefcase. He knocked once, firm and polite. "Mr. Decker," he said when I opened the door. "I'm Special Investigator Rylan Cole with the District Attorney's Office. I'd like to talk to you about the documentation you submitted to the county auditor last week." I stepped aside and motioned to the dining room table, where everything was still spread out, color-coded folders, printed emails, audio transcripts, and the flash drive Jonah had given me. Cole didn't waste time with small talk. He slipped on a pair of gloves, opened his briefcase, and began laying out evidence bags. "We've been looking into fraudulent HOA activity across the county," he said. "But this is the first time we've received a full paper trail tied to forged signatures and embezzled funds. You may have just cracked open something bigger than Oak Hill Pines." I leaned forward. "How much bigger?" "Several neighborhoods," he replied. "Same landscaping company, same inflated invoices. Different HOAs, but the same family name on the checks. You said the company was owned by Sheila Grantham's nephew?" I nodded. "We confirmed that. What you may not know," he continued, "is that the nephew Todd filed for bankruptcy last year. 2 months later, the HOA here increased its landscaping budget by 80% with no competitive bids. That's laundering disguised as maintenance." I sat back slowly. "So they were funneling HOA money into a failing company?" "Exactly," Cole said, "and they weren't subtle about it. I've already pulled the bank records. What I need now are affidavits from homeowners detailing the sudden fee increases, unexplained fines, and denials of records requests. Will you testify if it goes to trial?" "You won't have to ask twice," I said. That afternoon, I met with Maria and Jonah in the Ortega's backyard, where half a dozen neighbors had already gathered. We laid everything out: the DA's interest, the scope of the fraud, and the need for witness statements. No one hesitated. People were angry, not just because of the money, but because they'd been lied to for years in their own homes. By evening, we had over 30 notarized affidavits, each one describing a unique instance of overreach or manipulation by the HOA board. Some were petty, like denying fence repairs until a compliance donation was paid, but others were serious. One elderly couple had been threatened with foreclosure over a fabricated lien. They'd paid it, afraid of losing their home. Cole returned the next morning with a second investigator, a woman named Pierce, who took statements and sealed evidence envelopes with practiced speed. By the time they left, they had enough to justify a search warrant. The following Wednesday, just after lunch, unmarked vehicles rolled into the neighborhood. Officers in plain jackets stepped out with clipboards and warrants. They headed straight for the HOA's office, which was quiet. Sheila hadn't been seen in 2 days. Dennis and Lana were both home, though, and each received a visit. I didn't watch. I was in my garage, tightening the bolts on a suspension arm when I heard someone clear their throat behind me. I turned to see Dennis, pale and sweating, standing just inside the open door. "Granger," he said, avoiding eye contact. I didn't know about the bank stuff. Sheila handled all the finances. I wiped my hands on a rag. "You signed off on the budgets." "She said it was normal," he muttered. "That it's how all HOAs operated. Did you ever ask to see the original invoices?" He hesitated, then shook his head. "She told us not to worry about details, said too many cooks would spoil the pot." "She ran it like a racket," I said. "And you let her?" He looked like he wanted to argue, then just turned around and walked off. Later that night, an email went out from the district attorney's office. Sheila Grantham had been taken into custody at her sister's house in a neighboring city. She was being charged with multiple counts of fraud, forgery, and misappropriation of community funds. Bail was denied due to flight risk. The next morning, the local paper ran a headline across the top fold: HOA president arrested in multi-neighborhood fraud scheme. Beneath her mugshot was a quote from the DA. "This is a case of unchecked power used for personal gain. It stops now." But the fallout wasn't over. The new interim board, hastily assembled from longtime residents, called an emergency town hall. The community center filled up again, but this time the mood was different, not angry or panicked, but determined. People brought notebooks. They asked real questions. They wanted transparency. Jonah stood at the front and pointed to a whiteboard where he'd listed every HOA rule still in effect. "We're going to vote on which ones stay," he said. "And which ones we throw out?" Someone from the back asked. "What about the fines we already paid?" A woman named Ellen, a retired accountant who'd volunteered to audit the books, stepped forward. "We're compiling a refund list. If your fine was illegal and most we'll return the money. We're even looking into restitution from the seized assets." Neighbors began cheering, not wildly, but with the kind of relief that comes from finally seeing progress. I stayed late that night, helping box up old papers and prepare for a full digital archive. Jonah handed me a crumpled manila envelope. "Found this in the HOA's locked file cabinet," he said. "Figured you should see it." Inside were 3 letters, all from residents who'd tried to challenge Sheila's authority back in the early days. Each one was dated, stamped, and marked "Rejected, no legal standing." And each one had a completely fabricated citation number written on it. "They tried to fight her," I said, "and she shut them down before they could get traction." Jonah nodded. "She learned early that if people didn't know the rules, she could make up her own." We burned the fake citations in Maria's fire pit later that evening, one by one, under a sky full of stars. No speeches, no ceremony, just quiet resolve. The following week, a letter arrived addressed to me personally from the district attorney's office. It wasn't long, just a formal thank you, and a note that my testimony had been instrumental in opening a larger investigation into coordinated HOA fraud across the county. I pinned it to the corkboard in my garage, right next to the old copy of the bylaws. Not as a trophy, just a reminder that when someone tells you to hand over your keys without cause, you don't just open the door. You show them exactly what's behind it, and then you hold the door open for everyone else to see. And in Oak Hill Pines, they saw everything. 3 weeks after Sheila's arrest, Oak Hill Pines was quieter, but not in the way it used to be. It wasn't the silence of people avoiding each other behind drawn curtains. It was the collective breath of a neighborhood slowly exhaling after years of tension. Kids played with chalk in the cul-de-sacs again. Lawn chairs appeared on front porches. People had started waving at one another without that tight, polite smile that said, "I hope you're not bringing up the HOA." Still, there were loose ends, and some of them were much uglier than we had originally thought. I was in my garage, finishing a wiring job on the dashboard of my project car, when Jonah arrived unannounced, holding a red plastic binder and a yellow envelope. His face was tight, but not with anger, something else. He didn't sit down, just handed me the binder. "You need to look at page 22, he said. Now. The binder was filled with scanned documents recovered from the HOA's locked cabinet after the audit team cleared it for public access. At first, it was tedious stuff: vendor lists, email chains, and budget drafts. Then I reached the page he mentioned. It was a scanned letter, dated 4 years ago, typed on HOA letterhead and addressed to a couple on the far end of the neighborhood, the Masons. I remembered them only vaguely. They'd moved out suddenly, right after their son graduated high school. The letter was a cease and desist, threatening legal action over unauthorized contact with media and dissemination of defamatory HOA material. But what caught my eye was the attached invoice, a fine of $5,000 for reputational damage. "That wasn't legal," I said. "They made up a charge for talking to a reporter," Jonah nodded. "There's more. Check the envelope." I pulled out a printed report from the county's Office of Public Records. It showed a complaint filed by the Masons 6 months before they moved, alleging that HOA board members had falsified maintenance records to increase dues. The report had been labeled unsubstantiated and closed within 2 weeks. "Let me guess," I said. "Sheila had a family friend in the records office, her cousin, and he was fired last week," Jonah replied. "They're reopening the case." But here's the kicker. The Masons weren't the only ones. He handed me a second file, 5 more names, all former residents, all with similar complaints on record. Each one had been hit with bizarre fines, ranging from non-compliant feedback to undermining community confidence. None of those phrases existed in the HOA charter. "Where are these people now?" I asked, scattered, but I tracked down one Monica Patel. She lives 3 towns over. "She's willing to talk." The next day, I drove out to meet Monica. She lived in a modest townhouse with a tiny garden that she clearly loved. When she opened the door, her eyes flicked instantly to the folder in my hand. "You're from Oak Hill Pines," she said. I was wondering when someone would come. We sat on her back patio. She poured tea, but it went untouched. "They made our lives hell," she said flatly. "I served on the board for 6 months. The minute I asked to see the landscaping contracts, Sheila claimed I was sewing division and had me voted out. Then the fines started: trash can placement, grass height, pet leash violations. We didn't even own a pet. "Why didn't you sue?" we tried. But the HOA's insurance covered their legal fees. Ours didn't. We ran out of money. I nodded slowly. "Would you be willing to testify if this became part of a criminal case?" She looked at me for a long moment. "If it means that woman never gets to run anything again." "Yes." I spent the next week contacting the other displaced families. 4 of them agreed to speak with the district attorney. 1 declined. He was still too rattled by the experience and had moved across the state. But the rest gave statements. The DA's office now had a pattern: illegal intimidation, fake fines, and documented retaliation against whistleblowers. One morning, Investigator Cole called me from a courthouse line. "We traced the payment system," he said. Sheila had a private account listed under a shell company, Pine Hill Property Services. We found over $90,000 in unexplained transfers. "That's theft," I said. "It's worse." That account was used to pay off private contractors hired for security consulting, which turns out to be a group of plainclothes watches. Sheila used HOA money to pay people to monitor residents who complained. My stomach turned. She was running surveillance. "Selective harassment," Cole said. "We've got enough to file a racketeering charge." The arrest of Sheila's nephew Todd came 2 days later. He was picked up in another county, working under a different business name. The charges included wire fraud, conspiracy, and falsification of invoices. He flipped almost immediately, gave a full confession, and implicated Sheila as the orchestrator. But that's when things took a darker turn. During a search of Todd's apartment, investigators found a locked file cabinet. Inside were dozens of printed emails between Sheila and an anonymous third party who went by the initials DR. The emails were riddled with language about pressure tactics, removing resistors, and preemptive fines. But the most chilling one read, "If Granger becomes a problem, we escalate." I hadn't seen that one coming. Cole called me in. "We've traced DR to an unlicensed private investigator named David Rusk. He's been operating under the radar, mostly for shady landlord groups and HOAs that want muscle without consequences." "Was he watching me?" "Not anymore," Cole said. "He's in custody." "But he had files, photos of your house, your car, even your mail." I sat back, processing. "So she really was building a case against me, or a threat," Cole said. "But the good news, you've got enough standing now to file a civil suit, and you wouldn't be alone." I didn't hesitate. I called Monica, the Masons, the Patels, and the others. Within 4 days, we had a joint legal team and we filed a class action suit for damages, harassment, and restitution of illegal fines. The DA's office backed us with forensic accounting data. The case was airtight. 6 months later, every resident named in the suit received a settlement check. The HOA's insurance company cut the checks quietly, without admitting wrongdoing, but the amounts spoke for themselves. Mine wasn't massive, but it was enough to cover legal costs and then some. The best part. Oak Hill Pines voted to dissolve the existing HOA entirely. In its place, we formed a resident council, voluntary, transparent, and accountable. No fines. No surveillance. Just a group of neighbors who wanted to keep the place clean and safe without power games. Jonah was elected chair. Maria ran communications. I declined any official role, but they kept a chair open for me at every meeting. One evening, months after everything had settled, I was walking the neighborhood when I passed by the old HOA office. The building had been stripped, cleared out, and was now being converted into a community library. Kids had painted murals on the window boards. I paused at the door, seeing my own reflection in the glass. Behind me, a voice called out. It was Ellen, the accountant. "You did good, Granger. You didn't just stop her. You reminded people they didn't have to be afraid." I nodded. "That was the whole point," she smiled. "You ever consider running for city council?" I laughed. "After all this, I think I've had enough politics for a lifetime," but I paused before walking away. Because deep down, I knew something had changed, not just in Oak Hill Pines, but in me. I had started out just wanting to protect my garage, but when they tried to scare me into silence, they woke up something stronger, and in the end, it wasn't just about my keys. It was about making sure no one ever got locked out of their own home again.